So we did a couple of videos recently on the subject of universal credit, and we got a lot of comments back from those videos, none of which were particularly favourable towards that of universal credit. They highlighted all of the problems, all of the issues, but most of all, that universal credit just does not pay enough money for what people need. So it got me thinking, can you afford to live on universal credit if you have no other source of income? So if you haven't seen the channel before, we do videos aimed to help employees, but in this particular video it's going to be aimed to help people seeking employment. The videos that we try to do are engaging, but most of all, and most important to us, is to give you a real honest scope of what's actually going on with an unbiased opinion. If you like this kind of stuff, do consider subscribing to our channel, and at the end of the video, if you do like this one, do click the like button. With that, let's get to this video. So, can an average person in the UK afford to live on universal credit if they have no other income? So the way we've actually gone about trying to answer this question is to do some detailed research, crunch some numbers and actually look into real world scenarios. But I will warn you, the outcome of this video and the answer we got wasn't quite what I was expecting, but we'll get to that later in the video. To kick this video off, you can't just have a universal credit type system that pays enough money where people no longer need to go to work. Because if you have a system like that, then all of a sudden there isn't the incentive to go and get a job. But I can understand critics' arguments of the system saying that we don't want to pay too much because then people no longer need to go and get a job. But I can also understand the opposite argument where, well, we need enough money to be able to live on. So you've got to find the right balance. But in our last video on universal credit, and I'm going to put the link above, we found out a very interesting fact. You see, the UK poverty line is something that is heard about in the media a lot, but the actual amount of it isn't really dictating. We did talk about that in the previous video, but the key part of it is that the amount universal credit pays for a typical family, and that's 2 adults, 2 children for the sake of argument, is actually 40% under what is considered as the UK poverty line. Now that is a ridiculous statistic. As it stands, the system we know as universal credit does not pay enough for the average person in the UK, in my opinion. Plus, at the time of filming, tens of thousands of people are being made redundant on a daily basis. And if you're watching this video in the future and you're thinking, well, why is that happening? We're filming this video at the end of July 2020. And the reason there's so many redundancies at this point is that all of the people that are on furlough, and as it stands at the time of filming, there are 9.5 million people on furlough. Well, what happens as of August in a few days' time is that their employers have now got to start contributing to their wages. If they have no intention of doing that, and they're thinking, well, the market hasn't picked up enough for us to consider bringing them back, all they're going to do is make them redundant. And that's why so many people are being made redundant as we speak. So with those tens of thousands of people that are losing their jobs and being made redundant, they're going to need an income. So therefore, for many of those people, they're going to have to find an alternative income to be able to provide for themselves and their family. And the most common one is that of universal credit. So I think the first thing we need to establish in trying to answer this question is how much does the average person need as an income in order to be able to live on? But to be honest, this is a difficult question to answer in itself. First of all, you've got to consider that the average property or mortgage rate can differ wildly depending on your circumstances and where you live in the country. But to be fair, universal credit does have a system to get around landlord rents. It's called managed payments, and the way it works is instead of paying you to pay the landlord, universal credit can bypass you altogether and pay your rent directly to the landlord through them. Now, although I'm going to go into a little more detail on mortgages and rental costs and how they come into this equation, I'm actually going to skip this for the moment and come back to that later in this video. So we did quite detailed research to be able to come to a formulation in this video and to get the answer for you. But this research isn't just second hand. I've actually been pretty poor myself in the past, so a lot of these numbers are genuine because I've been there and I lived on some of these numbers. Starting with food, you can actually live on £20 per week per adult and £15 per child per week for their food. Now some of you might think, wait a minute, £20, well that's perfectly fine, I can live on that. But others of you might be thinking, well, Domino's cost me about £15. So again, it's different per different person. But push come to shove, you can comfortably, with a balanced diet, live on £20 per adult and £15 per child per week. Now I know you can live on that because I've lived on less than that. But bear in mind, that wasn't exactly a balanced diet. It was, smart price beans, digestives and super noodles. Student life, eh? What about clothing though? Well, you could go to Primark or you could even go to a charity shop. mean, Primark, for example, do t-shirts for £3. Just don't expect to win any fashion competitions. Then you've got household bills. Unfortunately, if you like your Sky TV, live Premier League football and PlayStation Plus, you might have to consider saying goodbye to those ones. I like watching Premier League Super Sunday, but it's not exactly a necessity, is it? You'll probably need to cancel, arrange payment plans, etc, but yeah, you're probably going to have to say goodbye to it. As for your other household bills like electricity, gas and water, they're not actually that expensive if you're clever about it. If every year you go on to price comparison websites, you look for the cheapest price, you get a deal, you tend to save yourself quite a lot of money. For example, I have a 4-bed house and we have 4 people living here, and all of my bills for that, for gas, electricity and water over an entire month, come to no more than £120. What's next on the list? Transport. In the nicest way, your mode of transport doesn't have to have an Audi, Mercedes-Benz or BMW badge on the front of it. You can find a perfectly reasonable car that will get you from A to B, start first time and pay as little as £1,000. Okay, you're not going to win any popularity contests, but you're trying to live frivolously here. So for the meantime, you're probably going to have to park your vanity in the garage. So taking all these things into account and excluding the rent or mortgage payments just for the meantime, you're looking at about £190 per person per month in the UK to be able to live on. But hang on a minute. How did I come to that particular number? I haven't just plucked that number out of the air, by the way. I keep detailed records of costs. And you might think that's a bit weird, but bear in mind I do run a business, so it kind of comes with the territory. And I actually lived on that figure for just shy of 2 years, not that long ago to be fair, so I know it can be done. But don't expect a holiday or luxuries or any treats or stuff like that, because that's not really what this is about. The purpose of universal credit is actually about giving you enough money to be able to live on, not being able to treat yourself. So to give you a benchmark, the calculations work out if you had 4 people living in a house, that's going to be £760 required worth of income per month, or £9,120 over the course of an entire year. Whoa, hang on a minute. Didn't I say in our video on how universal credit works, link up there by the way, that universal credit pays a little over £12,000 a year, and I said it in a very sarcastic tone. As in, £12,000 a year? That's ridiculous. How can a family of 4 afford to live on that? That's disgusting. So this got me thinking, how on earth did I manage to live with a family of 4 not that long ago on £9,000 a year? Well, bear in mind, there was 4 of us at the time. I was the only one working. We had 2 young children and my wife didn't work. So we're living in a council flat, we didn't have much money, and I was on £13,000 a year and I was the only employed person in the household. We didn't claim any benefits, and out of that £13,000 we had to pay the rent for the flat plus the actual living costs to be able to live on. And we didn't get any extras, we managed to live on that and we managed to get by. Don't get me wrong, we couldn't have a holiday, etc. But to be honest with you, it was doable. We managed to live like that sustainably for around 2 years. So here's the kicker. You can afford to live on universal credit. And I know so because I've lived on that. Okay, I wasn't on universal credit, but I had the same amount of income basically. And it was doable. I did it. But something doesn't sit right with me about it. I wasn't expecting this outcome. I was expecting to be able to lay into universal credit, really give it a good kick in. Because I look at it and I think, well, it doesn't feel right. So I wanted to have a little bit of a deeper delve into this and see why it didn't feel right. Most people become accustomed to living on 80% of their general income, with the other 20% being used for things like treats and luxuries. And if you're thinking, hang on a minute, 80%? That sounds like a familiar number. Well, it probably is, because that happens to be the exact way that furlough is calculated. It pays 80% of what your general wage is, because again, they know that 80% of someone's general wage is what they can afford to live on. But universal credit, unlike the furlough scheme, doesn't correlate to what someone's general income is. So unless you've become accustomed to living on smart price noodles and living in a 2-bed council flat, the chances are it's not going to pay enough money for you. Your bills, your general commitments, normal payments, things like that, contractual agreements, leases, everything like that, if all of a sudden you go from having a standard income to having universal credit, that's where the problem comes in. you're going to see an enormous hit on what you had, because what you need to be able to sustain the standard of living that you've become accustomed to and what your actual bills need you to be able to pay for, universal credit isn't going to cover it, and that's where it becomes a real issue. Now, going back to my earlier point on rent and mortgages, universal credit doesn't like paying rent to landlords, but it can be done. But if you've got a mortgage and you're relying on universal credit to pay for it, you're going to be up the proverbial creek without a paddle. And this is because until you've been on universal credit continuously for a period of 39 weeks, they won't pay a penny towards your mortgage. All the equity you've built up over the last 10, 15, 20 years paying a mortgage because you've lost your job through no fault of your own, well, all that equity, you could be waving goodbye to it. And that's the problem with universal credit. It just doesn't pay enough for what the average person actually needs. I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if universal credit was designed by some pen pusher in an office somewhere tasked with trying to find a way of being able to pay the minimum amount possible. It's basically the same task some nerd would be given by a car company to try and calculate the maximum amount of miles per gallon a car could get. They'll be sitting there saying it's 90 miles to the gallon when in reality it's like 35. But whatever way you want to look at it, the figures that are being given don't tend to be very real world. They need to be looked at, and I mean, this is a ridiculous scenario. And in some ways, I'm hoping that if one good thing does come out of this, that the sheer volume of people all of a sudden claiming universal credit, the people that are looking at it realise that the system has to be changed. You can't be paying people that amount of money considering what actually people need to live on in the UK. I realised I could have got by on it, but if you asked me to all of a sudden do that today, I couldn't live on it. I'd be stuffed, I'd be screwed, I'd have credit card bills coming out of my ears. And whilst I understand that universal credit has to be sustainable in its affordability to the government, this is beyond the joke. And with that, I guess that pretty much sums up the video. Any comments you've got, put them in the box below. I would do my very best to come back to everybody, I always do. If you like the video, click the like button, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you're not going to miss any one of our forthcoming videos.